"So," she said, leaning against the doorframe in that dress. "Still think you just came over to fix the lights?" I looked at her once. Took my time. "I'm starting to think the lights were never the problem." She smiled slowly. "Smart man." I put the screwdriver down. "Before I tell you the rest, has someone ever shown up so unexpectedly that you stopped remembering why you were keeping your distance in the first place? Leave it in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss this. Because what happened next, I still think about. Let me tell you something about the kind of person I was before any of this happened, because it matters. Not in a dramatic way. I didn't have some dark origin story, no tragedy worth a movie, no rock bottom with a timestamp. I was just a guy who had learned, slowly and thoroughly, to want less. To keep the radius of his life small enough that nothing inside it could surprise him. My name is Rafferty Cole. I'm 34 years old. I live, or lived, depending on how you measure these things, on the 4th floor of a mid-rise on East 6th in Austin, Texas. I work at a tech repair shop 6 blocks away called Ground Wire, where I open the doors at 9, fix cracked screens and dead charging ports until 6, and occasionally stay late to help a college kid recover a thesis they forgot to back up. In my off hours, I do private repairs at my kitchen table, laptops, tablets, the occasional vintage turntable someone's grandmother left behind. I charge fair rates and I don't oversell. That's the whole business model and also, if I'm honest, the whole philosophy. My apartment looked like someone had furnished it with intention and then stopped caring whether anyone noticed. Gray couch. Small television I used mostly for background noise. 2 bar stools at the kitchen counter, though I never had a second person sitting at one. A coffee maker that I genuinely believe kept me functional through some of my worst winters. The toolkit under the counter was better organized than anything else I owned. Make of that what you will. I wasn't unhappy. I want to be clear about that, because people tend to assume a quiet life is a sad one. It wasn't sad. It was controlled. After a few years of things going sideways in ways I hadn't planned for, a business partnership that collapsed badly enough to cost me a friendship, a relationship that ended not with a fight, but with a slow fade I didn't know how to stop, I had made a deliberate choice to simplify. Fewer variables, less exposure, a life that ran cleanly, like a well-maintained machine. I had a friend named Wilder Hatch who called this my monk phase and told me regularly that I needed to get out more. Wilder was my opposite in most ways, loud, generous, perpetually optimistic about everything from stock picks to sandwich specials. But he was also the most genuinely decent person I knew, and I trusted his read on me even when I argued with it. He'd been trying to talk me into going into business with him for about a year by that point. A proper repair shop, he said. Phone work, custom builds, data recovery, house calls. Real work, ours, not someone else's. I kept telling him I'd think about it. What I meant was that I was afraid of wanting it too much. That was the version of me that existed on the morning of April 14th, a Thursday, when I left my apartment at 8:20 with a coffee in hand and nearly walked into a moving dolly stacked with boxes. The mover didn't apologize. He just angled around me like I was a traffic cone. I stepped back against the wall, and that's when I saw her for the first time, standing at the open door of 4B, directly across the hallway from my own apartment, holding a terracotta pot with a small olive tree in it like she carried living things up 4 flights of stairs every day and found the whole exercise mildly beneath her. She was tall, dark hair pulled back in a way that looked considered without being fussy. She wore a white linen shirt, slightly wrinkled from the move, and she was directing the movers with brief, specific instructions that left no room for interpretation. Not rude, just precise, like a person who had learned that clarity was a form of kindness. She noticed me noticing and didn't look away first, just gave a short, neutral nod, the kind that said I see you, neighbor, without committing to anything further. Then she went back to supervising. I took the stairs. I thought about her twice on the walk to work, which I considered twice too many for a person I hadn't even spoken to. Austin in mid-April is the kind of beautiful that almost feels unfair, the live oaks fully leafed out, the air carrying cedar, and something sweeter underneath. The mornings cool enough to still want the coffee, but warm enough to not need a jacket. Spring in this city has a way of loosening things you've kept tight all winter. I didn't know then what was already in motion. I didn't know her name, or what she did, or what she was carrying that had nothing to do with moving boxes. I didn't know that the hallway between our 2 doors was about to become the most important geography in my life. I just knew that when I unlocked ground wire that morning and flipped on the lights, the apartment I'd left behind felt, for the first time in a long time, like it might be missing something. I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong. Her name was Vesper Lane. I learned that 3 days after the move, on a Sunday morning, when I found her crouched in the hallway next to a flat-pack bookshelf, instruction sheet spread on the floor beside her, holding an Allen wrench like it had personally offended her. I almost walked past. Instead, I stopped. "Those instructions are designed to break people," I said. She looked up. "They're already succeeding." I put down my coffee, sat on the floor across from her, and had the shelf assembled in about 20 minutes. She watched the way I worked, methodical, no wasted movements, and at some point stopped pretending to help and just observed. "Vesper Lane," she said, when I tightened the last bolt. "Rafferty Cole." She repeated it once, quietly, like she was checking whether it fit. Then she stood, brushed off her knees, and said, "I'd offer you coffee, but I haven't found that box yet." She paused. "I owe you one." "You don't," I said, and I meant it. That was how it started. Not with anything dramatic. Just a shelf, a Sunday morning, and two people being honest in small ways before they knew it mattered. Over the following 2 weeks, we built the kind of rhythm that develops between neighbors who keep similar hours and aren't unfriendly, but aren't pushing for anything either. I'd pass her in the hallway at 8:20, coffee in hand. She'd emerge around 10 in athletic where that looked fresh from the drawer, heading somewhere with her phone already raised, mid-thought. We'd exchange a sentence or two by the elevator. Nothing that lingered. I learned things in pieces. She worked from home, brand consulting and creative strategy for wellness companies, the kind of work that involved a lot of video calls and carefully chosen words. She had moved from Chicago 4 months earlier, not for a job or a person she mentioned, just for a change that had apparently felt necessary. She cooked real meals, which I knew because the smell drifted under her door in the evenings. Garlic, something with lemon, once what I was almost certain was a proper beef stew on a warm April night when that made no practical sense. She borrowed a screwdriver one Tuesday, returned it the next morning with a small jar of coffee beside it, left outside my door without a note. I noticed the brand. It was better than what I bought. A week in, her kitchen lights started flickering. She knocked and asked, with the tone of someone who didn't love asking, whether I knew anything about electrical fixtures. I followed her in with my kit and fixed the connection in under 10 minutes while she leaned against the opposite counter, arms folded, watching. "You do this for a living too?" she asked. "Retail by day. Fix whatever people break by night." That sounds more honest than most jobs. I glanced at her. "What does your sound like?" She considered that seriously, which I hadn't expected. "Like I help people say true things in language that sells." She paused, which sounds either very useful or very cynical, depending on the day. I replaced the cover plate and gathered my tools. She didn't move toward the door right away, and neither did I, and for a moment the kitchen felt smaller than it had when I walked in. The window above her sink was open, and the evening air coming through it smelled like the flowering trees on the block, that particular April sweetness that Austin does for about 3 weeks before the heat takes over. "Thanks, Rafferty," she said finally. "Anytime." I went back to my apartment and sat at my kitchen table with a repair job I didn't touch for 20 minutes. I wasn't reading into anything. I was just paying attention. There's a difference, even if it doesn't always feel like one. Vesper was the kind of person who made you want to be precise. Not to impress her, but because imprecision felt somehow disrespectful of how carefully she moved through the world herself. Wilder noticed the shift before I said a word about it. We met for food trucks on a Friday evening, and somewhere between the first and second taco, he put down his napkin and said, "Something happened." "Nothing happened. You're here, but you're doing math in your head." "I'm always doing math in my head." "Different math." He picked his taco back up. "New person math." I didn't confirm it, but I didn't argue either, which with Wilder amounts to the same thing. He smiled at the middle distance and let it go, and I was grateful enough for that to buy the next round. Walking home that evening, I passed the flowering trees on East 6th, the sidewalk faintly lit with the last of the April sun, and I thought about a woman across the hall who returned borrowed tools with good coffee and no note. It wasn't nothing. I just hadn't decided what to do with that yet. It happened on a Wednesday evening, the 23rd of April, when the city outside was doing that thing it only does for a handful of nights each spring, warm enough to leave every window open, cool enough to still feel like a gift. I was at my kitchen table finishing a laptop repair, the kind of quiet, focused work that empties the mind of everything else, when she knocked. It was close to 10. I opened the door, and Vesper was standing there holding a charging brick in one hand and wearing the expression of someone who had been patient with themselves for as long as they intended to be. "Tell me you have one of these," she said, holding it up. "Mine is somewhere inside a box that is inside another box, and I have a client call at 7 tomorrow morning." I let her in without making a thing of it. Found the cable in my junk drawer, plugged her phone into the wall socket to confirm it worked. She sat on the edge of the couch while I checked the connection, and we talked the way we had started to talk, easily, without performance. The food trucks that set up on the corner weekends. Whether Austin had crossed some invisible line into being a city that only talked about what it used to be. She had a dry way of observing things that made ordinary subjects feel freshly considered. When the phone showed it was charging, she stood to leave. I walked her to the door. She stepped into the hallway. I leaned on the frame, and we finished a thought about a taco place on East Cesar Chavez that she hadn't tried yet. Then she was gone, door closed, and I went back to the table. The phone was still plugged into my wall. I noticed it about a minute later. I unplugged it and went across the hall to knock, but as I lifted my hand to the door, the screen lit in my palm. I should have turned it face down immediately. I know that. I've thought about it many times since. But there was a half second where the screen was simply there, bright and sudden in the dim hallway, and I saw it before I could choose not to. It was a photo of her. She was standing in front of a mirror, wearing a dark tank and loose jeans. One strap slipped off her shoulder. No performance in it, no angle chosen for effect. She was looking directly at herself with an expression I didn't have a clean word for, not sad, not proud, somewhere between the two, like a person checking whether they were still recognizable to themselves. It hit me in a way I hadn't prepared for, not because of what it showed, because of what it didn't hide. I knocked. She answered in seconds, saw her phone in my hand, and reached for it. Then she stopped. Her eyes came up to mine. "Did you open it?" The hallway felt very still. The window at the end of it was open, and the April air moved through quietly. I could have said no. I could have acted confused, made it easier for both of us, let the moment pass like it hadn't happened. I stood there for exactly 1 second weighing that option. It lit up when I picked it up, I said. I saw the photo. She went very still. Not angry, not embarrassed exactly. More like someone who had just heard a sound they weren't sure how to classify. I wasn't trying to, I added. She looked down at the phone in her hand. A long moment passed. Then she said, quietly, "Most men would have lied." "Probably," I said. She gave a short nod, still not looking up. Then, without me asking, she said, "Do you want to know why I took it?" I should have said no. I should have given her the exit. But the hallway felt too honest for that now, charged in a way that made pretending feel worse than the alternative. "Yeah," I said. "I do." She looked up. Her voice when she spoke was steady but unguarded in a way I hadn't heard from her before. I took it on a day I felt like I had disappeared. Not from the world. From myself. Work, routines, always being the composed one in every room. She paused. I just needed proof that I was still visible. That I was still a person and not just someone managing her life from a distance. Nothing in me had a clever answer for that. So I told the truth instead. "You are," I said. "Visible." Something shifted in her face. Not softer exactly. More open, like a room when someone finally raises the blinds. She studied me for a moment with that careful, measuring attention she gave to most things, and then she said, "I'm making dinner tomorrow. Nothing impressive. You can come over if you want to save me from eating pasta alone." I tried to answer like my pulse was behaving normally. "Yeah," I said. 7. 7 works." She went inside. I stood in the hallway longer than I want to admit, staring at her closed door. Nothing had technically happened. No line crossed, no declaration made. But I knew something had opened between us that neither of us was going to close again. And when I went back into my own apartment, it felt, for the first time in longer than I could measure, too quiet in a way that meant something. Dinner was pasta with garlic and olive oil, a green salad she'd assembled with the precision of someone who took simple things seriously, and a bottle of mineral water she apologized for twice before I told her to stop. Her apartment smelled like garlic and clean laundry and something faintly floral from a candle she claimed was only lit because her floor lamp was still misbehaving. I believed about half of that. We talked for 3 hours. Not the elevator version of talking, the real kind, where you stop monitoring what you're giving away. She told me about Chicago, about building her consulting practice from scratch in a city where she knew almost no one, about the particular exhaustion of being competent in public for years on end. I told her about ground wire, about the management track my boss had been quietly steering me toward, about Wilder's shop idea that I kept circling without landing on. She listened the way people do when they're actually collecting information and not just waiting for their turn. At some point the candle burned low and neither of us moved to replace it. What I didn't know that evening, what I had no reason to know yet, was that something else had followed her from Chicago. Not a memory, a person. His name was Donovan Reese. She mentioned him first about a week later, briefly, the way you mention a weather system that has passed, factual, clipped, carrying more weight than the words themselves. They had been together for 2 years. He was older, successful in the architectural world, the kind of man who filled a room with quiet authority and knew it. The relationship had ended 6 months before her move to Austin. She had done the ending. Then why Austin? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Because staying in the same city felt like waiting for him to decide I'd made a mistake. I filed that away without comment. What I didn't file away, though I should have paid closer attention to it sooner, was the look that crossed her face the following Thursday when her phone rang during one of our now regular evening conversations on her balcony. She glanced at the screen and something tightened around her eyes. Quick, controlled, gone in under a second, before she silenced it and put the phone face down on the table. Wrong number, she said. She didn't look at me when she said it. 2 days later, I came home to find her sitting in the hallway outside her own apartment door, back against the wall, knees drawn up, staring at nothing in particular. She had her phone in one hand and an expression I hadn't seen on her before, not the composed, measuring look I'd come to know, but something stripped of its usual management. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. I sat down on the floor beside her without asking whether she wanted company. After a minute she spoke. He called again. Donovan. He says he wants to talk in person. That he's going to be in Austin next week for a project. That he just wants closure. She laughed once, short and humorless. Men like him always want closure once they feel the door actually shutting. I didn't say anything immediately. The hallway was quiet, the building settling around us, a faint sound of traffic rising from the street 4 floors below. Is the door shutting? I asked. She turned her head and looked at me directly. Yes, she said. It is. I believed her. But I also knew that Donovan Reese wasn't going to accept that answer over the phone, and that whatever composed, unreadable calm Vesper carried through the world, she had built some of it specifically to survive the version of herself that man had once gotten close enough to unsettle. What I hadn't yet told her, what I had been keeping in its own careful compartment, was that I understood that particular architecture better than she knew, because I had my own version of it. Her name was Claire. We had been partners in a small repair business I'd started at 28, before Groundwire, before the monk phase, before I'd learned to want less. We had been other things too, briefly, in the way that happens when 2 people spend too many hours in the same small space believing in the same idea. When the business collapsed, a bad lease, a worse investor, decisions made too fast, it took the friendship with it, and something quieter besides. Not dramatic. Just gone. I hadn't told Vesper any of this yet. Not because I was hiding it, but because I hadn't found the shape of it in words that felt honest rather than performed. But that Thursday evening, sitting on the hallway floor with April air drifting through the window at the end of the corridor, I understood that we were both about to be asked the same question by our own separate histories. Whether we were done letting the past decide the size of our lives. I reached over and put my hand over hers, just briefly, just long enough to mean something without demanding anything back. She didn't pull away, and the door at the end of the hallway, the one neither of us had fully opened yet, moved another inch. Donovan Reese showed up on a Saturday. I knew because Vesper told me the night before, standing in my doorway with her arms folded and her chin slightly raised, the posture she used when she had already made a decision and was simply notifying the world of it. He had confirmed he was coming. She had agreed to meet him for coffee downstairs, in public, for 30 minutes. She wanted me to know. Not to ask permission, not to explain herself. Just to be honest with me before it happened. You don't owe me an explanation. I said. I know, she said. That's not why I'm telling you. I thought about that for a long time after she went back inside. I didn't see her the next morning. I went to ground wire early, stayed later than I needed to, replaced a cracked screen on a phone that probably wasn't worth fixing, and did it anyway because it gave my hands something to do. Wilder called around noon. I answered, which I don't always do when I'm inside my own head. You good? He asked. Working on it. The shop lease fell through on Bowie Street, he said. But there's a narrow place on East 5th that used to be a print shop. Right square footage, good light, rent we could actually survive. He paused. I need an answer, Raph. Not a maybe. An answer. I stood behind the ground wire counter in the middle of a Saturday and thought about Claire, about the business that had collapsed, about every careful smallness I had constructed since then to make sure nothing could fall that far again. I thought about Vesper saying I just needed proof I was still visible. I thought about what she had said about not wanting to live like her real life started after she recovered from it. Yes, I said. Wilder went quiet for 2 full seconds. Say it again. Yes, Wilder. Let's open the shop. He made a sound that was embarrassingly close to a cheer. I told him to calm down. He didn't. I let it go. When I got home that evening, Vesper was sitting on the hallway floor again, back against her door, but differently this time. Not the stripped, tired look from before. Something quieter, more settled, like a person who had put something down and found they didn't miss the weight of it. I sat down across from her. How was it? I asked. Exactly what I knew it would be, she said. He was reasonable and persuasive and completely certain that my feelings were a temporary condition he could wait out. She looked at her hands. I told him no, clearly, and then I left before the 30 minutes were up. Good. He said I was making a mistake. He would. She looked up. I blocked his number when I got upstairs. Something in her expression shifted then, opened slightly. Your turn. So I told her. About Claire, about the business, about the years I had spent making my life small enough that nothing inside it could surprise me. About the shop on East 5th that Wilder had found. About saying yes that afternoon for the first time to something that scared me genuinely, not just theoretically. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, You're not scared of failing. No, I admitted. You're scared of building something you care about enough to lose. I looked at her. You're very accurate, and I find it inconvenient. She smiled. A real one, the kind that reached her eyes before it reached her mouth. Then she stood, and I stood, and the hallway felt smaller than it ever had, and also somehow exactly the right size. She stepped close. I don't feel smaller with you, she said. I want you to know that. Whatever this is, whatever it turns into, I don't feel smaller. I didn't have an answer that matched that. So I kissed her instead, and she came to meet it without hesitation, one hand against my chest, and it felt less like crossing a line than arriving at one we had been walking toward since a Thursday in mid-April when a woman carried an olive tree up 4 flights of stairs and didn't look away first. After that, things didn't become simple, but they became honest, which is better. She stopped taking every client that paid well and started choosing the ones she actually respected. I turned down the management track at Groundwire. Wilder and I signed the lease on East 5th on the last day of April, in a narrow room that smelled like old ink and possibility. A month later, my kitchen table had invoices on it. My toolkit had become inventory. I was tired in a way that meant something was actually happening. One Sunday morning in late May, we drove west out of the city before sunrise. No plan, just a cooler and bad gas station coffee, and a river spot, she said, used to clear her head. Her hand stayed on my knee for most of the drive. The roads were empty. The sky opened up slow and pink over the hill country, and neither of us felt the need to comment on it. On the way back, she turned the radio down and said, You realize this is what I wanted, right? The bad coffee? Forward, she said. Just forward. That stayed with me. That evening, we carried groceries upstairs together, bumping shoulders in the hallway, arguing about whether we had enough limes for tacos. She unlocked her door, then mine, like the question of where we ended up barely mattered anymore. Everything ordinary about that moment felt larger than all the dramatic ones that came before it, because that was the part one had never trusted. Not the wanting, not the risk. The part after, where two people stop waiting for their real lives to begin and quietly realize they already have. I used to keep my life small so nothing inside it could fall. Now I keep it honest so everything inside it can grow. That's the whole story. Or the beginning of it, anyway. Thanks for watching. If this story meant something to you, please like and subscribe for more unforgettable stories about love, resilience, and second chances.